Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Some big NBA news coming in the past week that the Celtics have been engaged in trade talks with the Nets about Kevin Durant. That's coming from the two guys that you trust more than anything, Woj and Shams, the NBA breaking news gurus. But there are some conflicting reports about when these trade talks happen, Sap. Based off the initial reports, you felt like the Nets and the Celtics were currently talking. Then there's some reports coming out today and yesterday that no, these were talks about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks ago. But basically what it boils down to is the Celtics at some point in time offered Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and a first-round pick for Kevin Durant. The Nets said, no, we want Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, another rotational player, and 3 first-round picks for Kevin Durant, which the Celtics said no. So as it stands, nothing has changed from where it was when Kevin Durant had his initial trade request. But the fact that the Celtics, who were 2 wins away from the NBA title this past season, the fact that they're involved in trade talks is news in and of itself, Sam.
Yeah, they're doing their job. Look, when one of the best players in the league becomes available and has 4 years remaining on his contract, you have to pick up the phone and ask what would it take to get him here to Boston. I think he's still one of the best players in the league. He didn't have a really great postseason last year and getting swept by the Celtics. In fact, the Nets were the only team in all the playoffs last year that got swept when the Celtics took care of them back in late April. I think what you have to look at here is the Celtics offering Jaylen Brown. That's the starter, right? I mean, it has to be Jaylen Brown. It can't be Jason Tatum because he couldn't go to Brooklyn and be on the same team with Ben Simmons because of the contract machinations. So that can't work. Plus, Jason Tatum's your best player, and I wouldn't move him for Kevin Durant, or at least as part of a package for Kevin Durant. I don't even know if I'd move Jason Tatum straight up for Kevin Durant at this point. Tatum was first-team All-NBA, Durant second-team All-NBA. Tatum is 9 years younger than Durant, so I wouldn't start there. But Brown is the player, obviously, that the Nets would covet. Now, what other pieces would take place in this potential trade? White or Smart, that makes the contracts work. And again, you're giving them a really good player. And then draft picks, which is always going to be somewhat involved. So I put out a poll yesterday at John Sapp 25. Would you trade Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, and a couple of first-round picks? And surprisingly, it came back more no than yes. So, again, people that are responding to this poll are Celtic fans who fall in love with their players. I'll ask you the same question. Would you trade Brown, Smart, and 2 first-round picks for Kevin Durant? I know I would. I want to get your opinion on it.
I think it's too much, and I'm answering that based off of what the current NBA landscape is right now. Because I think as the Celtics are currently constituted, having added Gallinari and Brogdon, that they are currently, if not the title favorites, the Eastern Conference favorites. I think that they would have won the championship had this been their roster in the finals, and they would have beaten Golden State. So the problem with giving up Smart and Brown, I don't care about the draft picks, is that you're now inheriting all the risk. It's a no risk trade for the Nets. They're getting younger. They are not expected to compete for a championship anyways with all this turmoil going on there. You're getting a guy who obviously he's a way better player than Marcus Smart. He's a better player than Jaylen Brown. There's no arguing that. But you're also getting a guy who is perennially unhappy and is, playing on a surgically repaired Achilles. And so far he's looked absolutely no problems, but there is injury concerns. Except he hasn't played that many games the past 4 or 5 seasons. Not just because of the Achilles, he's had a lot of wear and tear too. So I feel like because of that, there's no super team right now in the NBA. The Celtics can look at their roster today and say, we don't need to do anything dramatic. We can legitimately win a championship with this roster. If, say, the Lakers or the Sixers or another team makes a huge move and suddenly becomes a super team, then you might say, we really need Kevin Durant. We can't win without Kevin Durant. But as a league, I think you have to look at what your competition is. And what your competition is right now is I think the Celtics don't need to give up a lot for Kevin Durant because they don't necessarily need him to be what puts them over the hump. They might already be over that hump. So that's my take on it. Again, yes, I love Marcus Smart. Yes, I love Jaylen Brown. obviously, I'm not insane. I know Kevin Durant's a better player than those guys. But there is risk involved with getting Kevin Durant. I think that anybody can acknowledge that because of his personality and because the injury stuff.
Again, the poll question, and I would be a terrible general manager because I would just give away the farm to get a superstar because that's the way I'm wired. Just give me superstars and I'll deal with the rest. But the question actually was, would you trade Marcus Smart to go along with Jaylen Brown and 3 first-round picks for Kevin Durant? And the poll came back, 37% said yes, 63% said no. So obviously Celtic fans are going to respond to this poll more than just generic NBA fans. The thing about Kevin Durant is he has 4 years left on that contract. And again, after 1 year, he may walk into Brad Stevens' office and say, I'm not happy, move me. That is a real possibility. We know that with Kevin Durant.
That's what he just did with Brooklyn, Seth.
He does.
He's not even a year into that contract. He hasn't even started that contract yet.
And this is right in his wheelhouse, right? Let me go join the team that eliminated me. He did this in 2016 when Golden State beat Oklahoma City, and Durant, as a pending free agent, said, I'll go join that team and win a couple of titles. He just got swept by the Celtics a couple months ago. So that's kind of in his DNA. He does that. But if he's happy here, you do have him signed for 4 more years. Now, what about the flight risk of Jaylen Brown, who has 2 years left on his contract? We hear that he wants to be the guy, which I don't think you're going to be a title contender if Jaylen Brown is the guy. I think you are if Jason Tatum is, or certainly Kevin Durant, or if they're both together. Jaylen Brown is now sidled up to Kanye West and Donda Sports. We saw him pose with Kanye West and Kyrie Irving, who's still a member of the Brooklyn Nets, in a picture. So that would be interesting. I think for theater, if the Celtics traded Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart to Brooklyn, just think of the Brooklyn Nets with Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, Kyrie Irving somehow survives and actually stays there, not Kevin Durant, and then throw in Ben Simmons, coached by Steve Nash. Oh, my Lord, that would be incredible. You need Sigmund Freud to show up and figure that team out. That would be brilliant. It would be very entertaining. But back to the Celtics, I think that, as you said, Jet, and you made a really good point, the Celtics, Milwaukee, a few other teams aren't desperate because this isn't Golden State of 5-6 years ago, which you looked at the roster and said, how the hell are we going to compete with that? I think these other contending teams can look at Golden State now and say, we can beat those guys, right? I mean, if the Celtics executed their offense better in the finals, they might be the defending champions, right? So there's no super team. So these other contending teams don't have to be desperate and go out and make crazy moves and moves that are very high ceiling but very low floor. And that could happen with Kevin Durant. I get that Jaylen Brown is 8 years younger than Kevin Durant, and you can't really extend Jaylen Brown until the fall. So maybe you just sit tight and then make sure that you start the communication going with Jaylen Brown and Kanye West or whoever else is involved. Antonio Brown, yes, he is the CEO of Donda Sports. I get it. But to at least maybe say, okay, Jaylen, we want you to be a Celtic for life, and here is a 4-year extension or whatever the case might be.
He's not gonna extend. Players don't do that anymore. Yeah, they don't.
They just wait. It's different than football where Kyler Murray after 3 years is getting a 5-year extension because it's football. You get your knee blown out and you turn into Robert Griffin III, and all of a sudden your marketability goes way down. In basketball, look, Kevin Durant signed a 4-year max contract with Brooklyn, and Brooklyn knew he was going to miss an entire season leading off that contract with that Achilles, right? And it was like, no big deal. We'll sign him. That's different. So I get that. So you don't know. You're just going to have to sit tight and hope that Jaylen Brown isn't a flight risk, which I think he can be if he wants to be the guy. Because as of right now, Jason Tatum is the guy. And even though Brown outplayed Tatum in the finals, Tatum is still considered the better player by probably 90% of Celtic fans and 95% of the league. So that's just the way it is with that.
Yeah, I think, Sap, that's obviously the big question mark in this equation. Talking trade is Jaylen Brown a flight risk? There's conflicting reports. Like you said, you've heard there's reports that he wants to be the guy, and obviously you don't hire Kanye West as your agent if you don't want to, try to shake things up and make some interesting moves. But then there's reports coming out today from local people, Mark Murphy, Jared Weiss. I saw Steve Bulpett too saying he does want to be here. He loves Boston. So you don't know, if I'm the Celtics and I have, hopefully Brad Stevens knows better than anybody because he can go direct to the source. And if he has the inkling that Jaylen Brown wants to leave here in 2 years, then yeah, absolutely. You pull the trigger. If having to add Marcus Smart is what gets it done to get Kevin Durant, because Jaylen Brown's out the door in 2 years, then so be it. But that the only way I'm doing that is if I know for sure Jaylen doesn't really like it here. He wants to try somewhere else where he could be the guy. That's the only way I feel comfortable doing that. Again, it's based off the landscape of the NBA, and that can change in a heartbeat, as we know. Say, I'm not saying this is realistic, but say Milwaukee suddenly gets, Donovan Mitchell, or Miami, who's been trying to get Donovan Mitchell. They don't have to give up much, and they get Donovan Mitchell. Suddenly they have a big three of Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, and Donovan Mitchell. Then suddenly you go, we might need Kevin Durant here to, beat this team. So we're willing to, part with a little bit more. But as it stands right now, on paper, I think the Celtics are the best team in the league. Vegas has them as the title favorites, the co-title favorites, the Warriors, and has them winning the most games in the NBA. So clearly, those people like what they see. So I think that for Brooklyn, obviously since they have Durant under contract, they're asking for the moon, and they should. But teams also know that because the way the NBA is right now, and because players have so much power, that they don't have to overwhelm Brooklyn with an offer. They are content, like the teams, like you said, Milwaukee, Boston, are content to just be what they are right now. And no one feels like they need Kevin Durant.
Right. And the two teams that have the most ammunition to go get Kevin Durant are the two teams that met in the finals last year, right? The Celtics and Golden State. Golden State has a treasure trove of options, right? You've got Jonathan Kuminga, Miles Moody. You have Andrew Wiggins, who was outstanding in the finals.
Yeah,
You've got James Wiseman. You've got 4 legitimate players, not to mention Jordan Poole. So of those 5 players, you could go to Brooklyn and say, okay, pick 2 or 3 of these guys and also some draft picks, and you'd bring back Kevin Durant to Golden State. Now, does he want to go back there? Maybe not. Maybe the relationship with Draymond Green is beyond repair. Maybe he just doesn't want to go back, because no matter what happens, it's just going to look like him piling on, going back to the defending world champions. Yeah. Boston will be a little bit different because they lost in the finals. So, as did Golden State back in 2016. So there's a lot going on there. Or maybe Kevin Durant just says, screw it, I'll stay here in Brooklyn. We'll get Kyrie for 1 more year. Ben Simmons is going to be healthy and engaged. Let's make a run at it and go from there. Who knows what's in Kevin Durant's mind? He doesn't appear to be communicating with everybody, so we're all guessing. And that's where we're at right now. So I just think that if the opportunity is there to get a player of that level, that you kind of have to be involved with that, and maybe you strike and do it, because those guys aren't generally available other than free agency. Heck, in the history of the league, the biggest player traded who was in his prime was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1975. Jed, he was 28 years old. He was clearly the best player, the most dominant player in the league. He was playing with the Milwaukee Bucks. He grew up in New York. He played collegiately at UCLA. He went to the Bucks and said, trade me to New York or LA, and they traded him to the Lakers. That was humongous. That was the biggest deal I think I could ever remember in the NBA. I don't think it'll even be topped by this, because now Durant's going to be 34. He's had these injury concerns. I don't think he's in the discussion as the best player in the league. He's certainly great. And, you put him on a team, they're going to be an instant contender, especially if he's going to be a teammate of Jason Tatum and the rest of the Celtics. I think the Celtics would clearly be the favorite, as they are right now, although it's not a clear favorite. They're co-favorites with Golden State. And again, you have to see what happens here going into the season. But it's a fascinating topic, because there's not a lot of teams that look at this and say, okay, we got to go get Kevin Durant, and this is what we've got to give up. And the thing is, a team like Phoenix, which was interested, can't do it now because DeAndre Ayton is back in Phoenix. And why would Phoenix trade Devin Booker, who, again, is kind of like their Jason Tatum? I think Tatum's slightly better than Booker, but you get the idea that those two guys are pretty similar in the pecking order in the NBA. Heck, they're both first-team All-NBA. You're going to trade those guys for Durant and
that doesn't
Tatum.
Make sense.
It doesn't make sense. So you want to. Jaylen Brown's like the perfect guy because we think he's a star, not a superstar. He could certainly be the main ingredient in this potential trade with other factors. So we'll see what happens. If Danny Ainge was the general manager here, this would not happen, because he'd be haggling over the draft picks and another rotational player. It just wouldn't get done. Although he seems to be fast to the trigger now that he's in Utah. Maybe when he goes to a new place.
Yeah, for draft picks, because he's acquiring the picks. Yeah.
Right. And he loves those things.
He's quick to acquire the picks. It's not to give them out. He doesn't like to give them out.
No, I mean, imagine going to lunch with Sam Presti and Danny Ainge. I mean, that would just be fascinating. I don't know if we'd get the order in before the place closed. It would be that difficult.
Sap, is the injury thing a concern for you about Durant at all?
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, he's 34 years old. Again, we're talking about someone who had an Achilles and missed an entire year, but he's looked really good in the last 2 years, but he hasn't been all that durable. I know since they signed in Brooklyn together 3 years ago, people have talked about how unreliable Kyrie's been, and a lot of that had to do with the vaccination or the lack of him getting the vaccine. Durant's actually played fewer games in those 3 years than Kyrie. Kyrie's played 103 and Durant's played 90. They've only played 44 games together. It just hasn't worked out. Sure, that's going to be a concern. Jaylen Brown hasn't been the most durable guy either. I mean, he's had a lot of these, hamstring type issues, what other types of things that have happened with him. So I think that that is a concern with any 34-year-old player who's played a lot of minutes. But I do think that he'll transition fine into old age because of the way he plays. He just shoots over people. I think Paul Pierce played pretty well in his early to mid 30s because he had an old man's game. It wasn't based solely on athleticism. Durant at a higher level, but is similar in that sense because he's 7 feet and he can just shoot over people. I don't think that he's going to age poorly, but yeah, that is a concern. Sure. When you've got an Achilles and a knee and all these issues that you've had, they can flare up, and Brown is 8 years younger. That's a huge difference. But again,
that's a career in the NBA. It's a full career for some players.
Exactly. And I think you brought up a great point, Jed. I think the teams now are looking literally 1 or 2 years max at a time. No more 4 years. Like, you have to kind of look at what the window is for the next year or two. Look at Golden State.
I feel like you have to, Seth, because the players are so quick to say, I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah. I mean, look at Golden State. 2 years ago, they had the worst record in the league. Got the draft picks, started to rebuild. The next year, they were in the play-in tournament and lost, and then everything comes together this year, and they're the champs. The Celtics, the year before, were a 500 team. Heck, they were below 500 mid-season, and then they turned it around and made it to the final. So the days of super teams, I don't think they're over. They'll resurface again. But I think that, now you can kind of feel good going into a season. Look, if you're Milwaukee, Philly, Miami, Boston, maybe even Brooklyn, if they keep the gang together, all 5 of those teams can look and say, heck, we can contend for a title. And out west, Phoenix runs it back. I think Denver could be a player if they get their guys back healthy. And look, the Lakers, if things work out, there's like a perfect storm, maybe they contend. So there's 8-9 teams that can look and say, you know what, we can definitely make a run at this. And if Dallas can add another piece to Luka, they'll join that club as well. So it's not like it was.
I'm sure Minnesota thinks that they can compete too. Sure, they traded a million things for Rudy Gobert. So.
Yeah. And maybe they should have gotten involved in the Durant sweepstakes, if they just had been more patient with all these draft picks and players, although I think it would take more to get Durant than what they gave up for Rudy Gobert. At least
I don't know that he would have shown up in Minnesota if he would been willing to just, be there. But Sap, I think that's exactly right. That's how teams are looking at things. I wanted to circle back to something you said right at the very top of the show, where you were talking about, it's sort of Brad Stevens and front office's responsibility to, if a player of Kevin Durant's caliber, not even, it doesn't have to be any player, you're supposed to kick the tires and say, hey, what can it take? Because maybe you have a Malcolm Brogdon deal that falls in your lap that you give up nothing and you get a really good player. So that's sort of the GM and front office's responsibility. And yet I see a lot of people, specifically Lakers fans and, fans, a lot of people don't like the Celtics because they're, one of the most popular teams in the league. So naturally they're going to be one of the most hated teams in the league too, are saying, oh, this is Isaiah Thomas all over again. They did Isaiah Thomas so dirty. They're doing Jaylen Brown dirty right now. Like, I just don't understand that logic. Like, would you not trade Jaylen Brown straight up for Kevin Durant if Brooklyn was okay with that? Is that doing Jaylen Brown dirty? Or I don't feel like that's a compliment.
No.
Like, hey, you're getting traded for one of the greatest players of all time. I don't look at it that way. Like, how are the Celtics screwing Jaylen Brown? They're doing their job. Like that's what they're supposed to do.
Look, like I said, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was traded. So anybody can be traded. LeBron James has never been traded. He always went elsewhere as a free agent. Michael Jordan was never traded. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who I think is the 4th greatest player in the history of the sport, got traded. And again, he ignited that because he didn't want to play in Milwaukee anymore. But it can happen.
Fred, are you
great
telling me
baseball players have been traded.
The Lakers haven't inquired and said, hey, would you maybe consider Anthony Davis for these guys? Like, come on. And if they're smart, they have. But
I floated the idea of Westbrook and Anthony Davis plus whatever. Obviously, draft choices would have to be involved to Brooklyn for Kyrie and Durant. I mean, imagine a big three of LeBron, Kyrie, and Durant. That would be
that'd be crazy.
Pretty special. That would be pretty special because I think they would work so well together.
I don't know if anybody wants to play with Kyrie anymore at this point.
I know we say that, but he still has a great following within the league. I think he has like a trance over the top players.
I'm not sure what his relationship is with Kevin Durant as of right now. It seems like they were, best of friends and stuff like that, but like the timing of when Kyrie opted in and then like a day later Durant requested a trade seemed weird. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be. Or it could be a way of Kevin Durant trying to sidle up with Kyrie and saying, well, you're not going to extend him. You're just going to give him that 1-year deal that he opted into. So I want out of here. I want to get out before the ship sinks. So who knows what's going through all these players' minds. But yeah, I mean, look, if I'm the Lakers, sure, I would get on the phone and say, Anthony Davis for Kevin Durant, let's make it happen. And whatever the filler is to make the contracts work or whatever, you can make that happen in the NBA as long as the stars match up and both teams are up for that. But yeah, any team would be interested in Kevin Durant. Why wouldn't they be? I mean, the guy is still a great player. And he is kind of a plug and play player because he's not a guy that needs a lot of shots. I mean, damn efficient.
You've said this about him for years, that you feel like he's incredibly easy to play with.
Oh, sure. That's why it worked in Golden State with him and Steph Curry, because Steph's also very easy to play with. LeBron, not necessarily that easy to play with because he's kind of like the great quarterback in the NFL where you kind of have to do it on his watch. Whereas Durant and Curry can kind of just blend in and take their 20 shots and score 30 points and be damn efficient. Yeah, Durant to me is as easy as it is to play with. And that's why I think it would work in Boston with Jason Tatum. Now, there's a little redundancy there. Their games are very similar. But, if they were on the same team, good luck trying to defend, a 6'10" guy and a 7-foot guy who could just shoot over everybody and score in a multitude of ways. But, this is going to be a process. I don't think it's going to happen in the next week. If it does happen, it could happen in August. Again, unlike the NFL, you don't have to bring the star quarterback in early to learn the offense or to implement his offense. It's different in the NBA. You can make this trade in late August and you go to camp and everything will be just fine.
My guess is that he is going to start the season in Brooklyn, and that's just they're going to, continue to look for trades or whatever. But because he's under contract for 4 more years, Brooklyn doesn't have to, rush to get this done. And as long as he's not holding out, which I haven't heard anything about, then they really have no rush to get it done. And as far as, like I said, if we're looking at the NBA right now, all these teams who were, feel like they're close, I don't feel like any of them feel like they have to sell the farm for Kevin Durant.
Right.
I know Miami really wants him. Obviously, every team does. Miami doesn't really have the mechanism to get him because they can't trade Adebayo for him, which would be the logical thing. But Adebayo and Jaylen Brown probably have about the same trade value, I would say, more or less. Maybe Jaylen Brown slightly more because wings are more valued than bigs in the NBA. But so that would mean that if Brooklyn wanted more than Jaylen Brown and White and picks, that would mean they would want, if Adebayo was even able to be traded, they would want way more than him too. So, Brooklyn seems like, they'll ask for as much as they can get and they're content. As they're not going to get that, then they're content to hold on to him. So I kind of feel like he's going to start the season there.
And maybe by midseason, Phoenix gets involved because then they can trade DeAndre Ayton if he approves it, which I would think that he would approve getting traded.
1 year no trade clause.
Right.
Yeah.
But at midseason, it is a weird thing. Yeah, you're the only person that knows these things. I think you, Shams, and Woj are the 3 people on earth that understand how all this stuff works, and maybe Brian Windhorst as well. But I think when you get to midseason, he can get traded as long as he approves it. So maybe everything is on hold till then, and Phoenix will move Ayton and something else to bring Durant to Phoenix where he really wants to go. And then you'd have a big 3 of Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Durant, which would be another lethal big 3. So this is just going to be ongoing for a long period of time till it finally happens. And he's worth it. He's that good. And again, signed for 4 years. Normally when you make a trade for a superstar, they're going into the final year or the second to final year of their contract. This happened when Harden decided to bail out on Houston. He had 2 years left. So that affected what went back to Houston when he ended up going to Brooklyn. And then by the second season, he bailed out on them. Goes to Philadelphia. With Durant, you got 4 years. And I don't ever picture Durant bailing out on anyone. I really don't. I just don't think that's in his soul. I think he loves basketball so much that once he's there, he'll be committed and he'll play at a very high level. And he's so damn good that we wouldn't even know if he's bailing out. The guy could bail out and look like he doesn't care and still put up 30 a game because he's that good.
Absolutely. But it, like you said, it is kind of like a new NBA where players, you just like, you don't know. Suddenly one day they wake up and they're like, I don't want to be here anymore. And most of the time the team acquiesces, but 4 years is different than, 1 year or 2 year, obviously on the contract. It gives the team a little bit more leverage than what we're used to seeing in like a James Harden situation.
Mm-hmm. Because now he's still tradable after 1 year because he has 3 years left. So it's a good situation.
I think as far, last thing I want to say, Sap, about it before we talk about Charles Barkley, is I think that for some teams, like for Phoenix, I think Phoenix would be more desperate to get Kevin Durant right now because their window is shorter. I know Booker is young, but Chris Paul isn't. And so they feel like, hey, if we're going to win, we got to win while Chris Paul has some years left. Once Chris Paul goes, even as good as Devin Booker is and as good as Ayton might end up being, Chris Paul is sort of the straw that stirs the drink there. And once, he leaves, it's going to leave a gaping hole. If Golden State had lost to the Celtics in the finals, I think they would be much more active in trying to trade for Kevin Durant. They seem pretty content to just run things back and let these young guys sort of grow and morph into this new generation of Warriors. But I think had they lost the finals, they may have already made a trade for Durant. So I feel like those older teams, the Heat, Jimmy Butler is 33. That's why they're so anxious to get Kevin Durant. The Celtics are a very young team. So I don't feel like they feel the urgency to make that move as compared to, like I said, the Suns, the Heat. If the Warriors had lost, I think they would also be a little bit more desperate, but they're the defending champs. They don't have to be.
And so far, the Celtics have had a great offseason by adding Malcolm Brogdon and Danilo Gallinari. So now their bench is deeper, which I think it was a man short last year against the Warriors. They're more talented, more versatile. So now they can actually make a move, or if they sit tight, they look to have the best roster in the league, or at least the best roster along with Golden State in terms of talent at the high end and depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And, now if you don't complete a deal for Durant, which I think is probably the most likely thing is they don't, you just have to make sure that your relationship with Jaylen Brown remains good. You have, like you said, 2 years to make sure he's happy. You don't want to alienate the guy. We know it alienated Ray Allen under Danny Ainge's tenure long ago, but this is just sort of the price of doing business in the NBA. If you're good, your name's going to be in trade rumors. It's a compliment, really.
It is. Yeah. I mean, you're the centerpiece in a trade to bring back Kevin Durant. Look at it as you're pretty valuable.
Sap, we got to get out of here in like 10 minutes. I'm getting the Zoom timer, but before we do, we want to talk quickly about Charles Barkley. Potentially leaving his job at TNT to go be a golf commentator for LIV Golf, the Saudi Arabian golf tour that if you follow golf, which I don't follow it religiously, but, I know the main players and stuff like that. Essentially, Saudi Arabia's government is funding a competitor to the PGA Tour and paying just outrageous sums of money to get golfers to sign with them. And they want Charles Barkley to be one of the main commentators for it. And he was on, I think it was Dan Patrick, Sap, saying it would take, he makes approximately $20 million a year, which is amazing. Good for you, Chuck. He said it would take about triple that to leave TNT and go to that. Obviously, the Saudi Arabian government has the money. Do you see that this is, do you think he would actually make that move, Sap?
I think he would. The thing is, he makes $10 million a year from Turner, and then about another $10 million a year in endorsements. What would happen is if he goes to the LIV Golf Tour, that he would lose those endorsements, I would think. If he tried to do both things, I think TNT would lose some sponsorships. It gets very complicated because no one wants to be tied into the Saudi royal family, the Saudi government. The Saudi royal family is worth $600 billion in legitimate cash. So they could go with this as long as they want. It's generally or it is literally a new shiny toy for them. I mean, if they want to get into the NFL, they could probably do that as well and go buy quarterbacks.
Sure.
So it's a lot more complicated doing it in football where you have a full roster. Golf's the perfect sport to do this.
They already do it in boxing, Sap. They do it in boxing.
Same with boxing, horse racing,
wrestling.
Yes, exactly. And if they want to get into tennis, Novak Djokovic, Rafa Nadal, and Roger Federer is, $75 million a year.
Sure.
Come play tennis, and all of a sudden you'd have a huge brand. So Barkley has to weigh that. So, if they go out and offer him, say, $40 million a year or $30 million a year or whatever, it's enticing, but then he's going to lose his sponsorships. And then in 3 years, when this thing finally blows up, if it does blow up, can he go back to Turner? Can he go back and do his endorsement deals with, T-Mobile or whoever else he sponsors? I think in the ideal world, he could do both because, Barkley, we love Charles Barkley, right? But, he's not a guy who's in there in terms of the nuts and bolts. Going to be analyzing golf swing because if you've ever seen him golf, he has one of the ugliest golf swings I've ever seen. It's worse than mine, and I don't golf anymore. He's going to be there for entertainment. We saw him on The Match, where Aaron Rodgers dominates every year by beating every other quarterback in golf. Maybe he'll start beating them in football games, which would make me happy at some point. But he's great on that because he's just a personality. And we love Barkley. He's opinionated. Look, I thought that Barkley should have went and started doing hockey when TNT got that contract. I think he'd be great.
Just have him do whatever, any sport. Yeah, sure.
Any sport, better than Wayne Gretzky at it. And then Gretzky's arguably the greatest player ever. Barkley would be great on the pre- and post-game show doing hockey. Heck, maybe Barkley and Gretzky's wife, Janet Jones, could do a gambling podcast because we know Barkley loves to gamble. So does Janet Jones. So there's so many possibilities with Barkley. Maybe TNT says, Charles, we want you to stay here. We're going to offer you more money. You still get your endorsements. And, we want to break you into maybe doing a little bit of hockey and some other things. And we don't want you to go to LIV and then make it worth as well. Maybe it's just a negotiating ploy to get more money out of Turner because, quite frankly, he's worth it. He's the best at what he does.
It might be a negotiating play. The problem is Turner, they're obviously a huge company. The Saudi government can just outbid them if it's purely about money. And if they want him, if they're like, this is the guy, we want him, period. They can offer him. They can write him a blank check. That's not a problem for them. Like you said, they're liquid as hell. Money is nothing to the Saudi government. They print it.
Where does this go on to though? Because I'm not really watching it, but it's on YouTube at this point because they don't even have a partner with it. Like the networks don't want to touch this. This is really just blowing whatever amount of money you want on a fancy wedding and no one shows up to it, but you have the best food and the best band and you just please yourself.
Yeah, well, the term is, that's being tossed around now is called sports washing, and that's what they're doing. The Saudi government does a lot of really bad things and is responsible for a lot of bad things in their country and other countries. And they just don't want people to talk about that. So, hey, we're paying, we're paying Phil Mickelson $75 million. Look at this. Charles Barkley's commentating. We're paying him, $50 million to do commentary for 2 matches. Like people are like, whoa. And that takes away the headlines.
Right.
Unfortunately, it works. That's why they're doing it is because it works. But
it's Al Pacino. Yeah. It's Al Pacino in The Godfather 3 giving a ton of money to the Vatican.
Do they care if it's successful or not? No, they don't give a shit if it's successful.
Exactly. And the other thing too is
with anybody.
I'm no fan of the Saudi government or the Saudi royal family, nor am I a fan of China. And the thing is, I think it's hypocritical when people say, I can't believe, that a golfer is going to golf for the Saudi Saudi royal family. But, we don't have a problem with China being involved with the NBA because China, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, these are all terrible places. Vladimir Putin's a terrible man and Russia, but we seem to have ties to many of these countries. So let's not be hypocritical and think that Charles Barkley is going to save the day by not going there if they offer him all this money, or Dustin Johnson's not going to go there, or Phil Mickelson's not going to go there because, they're throwing money at all of this. But, China's also involved with the NBA. So let's be real about that. So if Charles Barkley goes there, I'll support him and I'll tune in because he's that good.
Yeah. And he would get paid a lot of money to do it. These golfers are getting paid ridiculous sums and that's nothing to the Saudi government. It's like, buying a piece of candy at the store for them as far as they're concerned. But it is interesting, and it would certainly be a shame to see Charles Barkley. I don't care about the Saudi aspect of it. I obviously don't like their government, but like it would be a shame to have him not be on the TNT program because that's a highlight of my week is watching that show. And Draymond Green's not ready to retire yet and join that show, so there would be a big void.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's going to do it. We are going to keep a close eye on all this Kevin Durant stuff and the Celtics, see if anything else shakes out there. I'm sure there will be more rumors by the time we do our next show, not necessarily with the Celtics, but with another team, because it's a little bit of a slow period and Kevin Durant's a huge name. So these guys are going to report on anything that has to do with him and NBA trade rumors. We still got to see what happens with Donovan Mitchell. That trade seems like that is likely to happen before the season. So plenty of stuff to talk about in the NBA. And even though football is approaching, we're still going to talk plenty of basketball here. We'll talk about Aaron Rodgers too, Sap, as the season approaches. We can talk a little bit about him showing up to camp today looking like Nicolas Cage from Con Air.
He did.
But that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out their website. Sap always has great columns coming up on there, so you check those out. Check out our social medias for updates on the show and different opinions and polls at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer. And we will talk to you later. See you, everybody.